Welcome to the War Games Room. I'm Yasmin Khan, your host curator. In this section of the Museum of Truth and Lies, I'm zooming in on how museums represent war and conflict. Peter Kennard is Britain's most influential political artist who has been at the forefront of anti-war activism for over 50 years. I wanted to find out what drives him to speak truth to power and what inspires people to use his artwork to campaign for social justice. Peter let me into his studio ahead of the opening of his latest exhibition, Archive of Dissent, at the Whitechapel Gallery in East London.
Our society is sort of dominated by lies in the sense that a lot of our experience of the world is about trying to push us to consume more and more crap, which is not only destroying our lives, it's destroying the planet now. In that sense, I don't know if I show the truth, but I show what's underneath the lies. The basic of a montage is you have two photos and you add another one, and through that adding you create a third image that is revealing what the other one doesn't reveal.
What's driving you to do your work? I'm
a Londoner, so I started off, went to art school at 16 and started as a painter. But then I got involved in the anti-Vietnam War demonstrations in London. Instead of just painting abstracts and sort of figures, I wanted to actually bring in my experience of those demonstrations into my work, and also what was going on in Vietnam. You know, it was like a political awakening for me. And so that's when I started doing montage. You know, I could use photographs from Vietnam, from the civil rights movement that was going on in the States, all those elements. I could start putting them together into an image, and a photograph seemed much more sort of real to me than paint, because with paint you've got a whole history of painting. With photography, everyone relates to an image. So, I mean, I've always wanted my work to be understood way beyond the art world. I wanted it to have a directness that people can get straight away. I've always believed the aesthetics are vital. You've got to make the best art that you can. It's as important as if you were doing a abstract or a Rothko or whatever, to make it try and be good art, I suppose, is what I'm saying, is important. I mean, I don't consider what I do propaganda, because I don't tell people, look at this and go and do that, join this or join that. I just try and create an image that is critical of what's going on in the world and how we see it.
You say you want your work to be understood. Do you want your work to affect change?
I believe in much more in working with people. So I've always worked with different groups like Amnesty or CND, or one time the Labour Party. You know, like at the moment, I'm relating a lot to the horrors that are going on in Gaza. So I've done something that can be used by Stop the War, who turn it into a poster. Did a lot of CND work, and it raised funds for CND. That's the other thing, these groups that haven't got money except from supporters. It's a sort of social use of art that I'm concerned with. But also working in galleries, I believe in the galleries offer something, and museums that offer something that isn't offered just in doing work outside in the street or on posters.
Peter revealed how he navigates the risk of censorship and gave me a sneak peek of his new show at the Whitechapel Gallery.
There is going to be work about Gaza that I've done, but it won't be work that's got words on it to tell you what to think or who to decide to support. The art world is been very affected by Gaza, and shows have been shut down, and Palestinian artists have been shut out. It's very difficult. Making political work is always, it's either you don't get it out into the world of galleries and museums, or if you do, obviously you then negotiate it.
What support would you like from funders to do your work?
I obviously think that political work should go into museums and galleries. It should open debate. That's what they should be about, these places. Here, the British Arts Council allowed a lot of critical work, but now the government's cut down on funding for the arts. So you have to have sponsors, and if you've got sponsors, you've got strings attached. But I mean, that's the problem, you know, sponsorship. And at the moment with Israel and Gaza, it's a lot of the collectors and the zillionaires who are deeply involved in the art world now don't want to have any political work.
Hi everyone, hi, good evening. Thank you so much for your patience while we squeezed every last person into the auditorium this evening. My name's Richard Martin, I'm Director of Participation here at the Whitechapel Gallery, and it is an amazing pleasure to welcome you to this very special evening programme entitled Peter Kennard and Friends. And this evening is a celebration and interrogation of our amazing new exhibition upstairs, Archive of Dissent. The show here features images and interventions that deal with international conflicts, with domestic politics. Peter is, as far as we know, the UK's only professor of political art, and we are absolutely thrilled to showcase his work here at the Whitechapel.
My name is Matt Kennard. I am Head of Investigations at Declassified UK. But I think the way that most of these museums support power is by leaving out stories, exhibits, narratives which really take on power. I think you can believe what you see in a gallery or a museum, but you need to think about what aren't they showing, what aren't they putting out. And my dad shows a good example of that. This is his first major show in a major establishment gallery. That tells you all you need to know about how the art world works, that someone who's been at the forefront of political art and art generally in this country for 50 years, and he's only now getting this show. It's because his work takes power on head on and doesn't leave out anything and is specific about who our enemies are. And I think that most galleries get scared by that. They like to give the impression that they're supporting dissent, that they're supporting creative freedom, but if you step too far into actually naming names and showing the reality of how the world works, then you'll be out the door. I think that curators are like any other figure in the cultural system. They get subsumed into the system by all the different mechanisms they use to get you, which is like funding, access, status, career progression, all these ways that they filter out people who are saying something which takes on the system. But the world's in too serious a crisis right now for people to play the game anymore. I think that we need to promote the dissident voices in our society because we're at a scary moment.
Peter Kennard is a friend and he invited me to come here, and I know that because he's a good person I wanted to come and see and visit the gallery, and I'm very happy I did actually, because it's very, very sophisticated, it's very well done, it's beautiful art, and it means a lot to me, especially because I'm a Palestinian and part of his paintings were about Palestine. My name is Ahmed Alnaouq and I am co-founder of an organization called We Are Not Numbers. I am from Gaza, Palestine. So my work is a storytelling project that aims to amplify the voices of youth and refugees in Gaza through writing stories about their life. I consider storytelling a form of art.
What would you like museums to do when it comes to storytelling about Gaza?
I would like museums to do what they should do, to give the freedom to the artists to express themselves. Palestine is not mentioned. Palestine is not talked about in the museums in the UK, and this is very unfortunate. Everyone should be against genocide. Everyone should be against war crimes. The museums in the UK are not doing their job educating the world about what actually is going on. Most of the museums in Palestine, in Gaza, were bombed by Israel. Museums were bombed. Heritage is bombed in Palestine. Artifacts are bombed in Palestine, in Gaza. Israel destroyed the oldest churches in the world that are in Gaza. Third oldest church in the world is in Gaza, and Israel destroyed it. It killed the people who were praying in it.
And finally, what advice would you give the next generation of curators and truth tellers?
To always care about the truth and to be courageous and brave. This is a time where we need brave people. We need brave artists, like Peter Kennard. He's a brave artist. And history will remember him as a decent man, as a good person, who cared for the weak, who cared for the oppressed. And history will also remember those who are cowards, who use their art to oppress people or not to talk about those who need the most to be expressed, need the most to be talked about. So history will remember everyone. So be brave, be courageous, because history will remember all of you.
Art is one of the most potent ways of taking on power, because you can really subvert power by mocking it, by doing what my dad does, which is photomontage, to try and bring together two realities which are kept apart by the corporate media. It's not going to get any better unless we fight back.
Peter calls himself the visual arm of protest movements. He hopes viewers will feel moved into action when they see his work.
Well, I want them to think about their experience of the world, their living experience, but also the experience of media that they see of what's going on around the world, and then to get a sort of critical take on it. So I suppose that's my ideal. You know, I've had emails from people saying, "Oh yeah, I saw your work 30 years ago and then I joined Amnesty," or something like that. That's great, you know, that someone it's affected them in that way.
How do you think emerging artists can survive in that kind of climate where there's very limited funding?
Well, I mean, they have to deal with, you know, I was always very snooty about being sponsored by Nike or something, but now if students are sponsored, I can quite understand it because they can't get their work out in other ways, you know. But obviously it's a sense of being used as well, you know.
Have you ever felt co-opted or instrumentalised in any way?
No, well, I did try and do advertising work for a time, and then before I taught, I couldn't stand it, you know, because you have to put as much creative energy into doing advertising some crappy product as you do doing your own work.
I'm Danny Robbins, presenter of the podcast Uncanny, and I'm standing in Peter Kennard's exhibition in the Whitechapel Gallery, surrounded by some very cool people.
How much do you trust museums to tell the truth?
I think I trust them quite a bit, actually, yeah. And I think I'm somebody who's spent a lot of my life just enjoying being in museums. I actually made a series called The Museum of Everything for Radio 4 years ago, which took me all around the country going to like obscure, eccentric museums. And so I love museums a lot, and I think that they are hopefully receptacles of truth and places where we store truth up.
What does good truth-telling look like?
I think presenting the facts without judgment, hopefully, though I know that's almost virtually impossible, but you know, each era has its take on what is the truth and how history should be presented, I know, and that's constantly shifting and changing, but you would like to feel that an object is truthful, wouldn't you? You'd like to feel that an object, you know, particularly when it exists free of signage, free of any sort of explanations or instructions, where you're just looking at it and it's in the eye of the beholder, you would feel that hopefully you are beholding a certain kind of truth.
Do you think museums have a responsibility to tackle world events and current conflict and wars?
I think so, a duty also not to get burdened and bogged down by that, I think. I think it's really important for us to interrogate each age and to reassess what's been said before and the kind of the views that have been held about history and things and facts and all those sort of things. I think we've got to constantly address that. But I also think that a certain timelessness is important as well, I think. I think one of the beauties of walking into a museum is feeling that you could be walking into it at any moment in history and that you are getting little slices of, you know, everything from the ancient world to the modern and enjoying it in your own way. And I feel like I've been to a lot of museums recently that are going through a sort of crisis of identity. Like I went to the National Army Museum with my kids and I sort of felt like it had turned into something that didn't want to be an army museum at all and had a very trendy hipster cafe and a soft play area and was doing everything it could say, we're not really about the army, look, there's an art exhibition. But I think, you know, sometimes museums just have to sort of accept what they are. And I think I love a museum that hasn't really changed over the years, actually. And, I don't think all museums need to be very fashionable and very hipster and kind of constantly shifting and updating themselves. And some of the museums I've enjoyed most are the ones with really creaky audio-visual displays and mannequins dressed up in ropey costumes. There's a museum in Tintagel in Cornwall with handwritten signs. It's called Arthur's Cave. It's got dinosaurs and mannequins dressed up as King Arthur and Merlin, and it feels like it hasn't changed since, the 1950s. And I love that, and I embrace that. And I think, museums shouldn't feel that they have to have the latest clothes all the time. I think sometimes it's okay to be slightly fusty and slightly old-fashioned, and we can dip into things and take different things from them. I think it's very, very important to be aware of these sort of things that have been pressed on us, certain views of history that have kind of excluded certain kinds of people and have kind of dictated to us certain kind of things which are now maybe revealed to be untrue or erroneous, to be aware of that, but also to allow certain things to exist. And sometimes to understand what's wrong with society, we need to see it. We need it to be not removed from our gaze or not changed. Sometimes we need to see things in all their kind of untarnished, kind of polluted and wrong state, and to make our own judgments about that, I think.
Have you ever seen anything that's changed your assumption or perception about something?
Oh gosh, I think great exhibitions can do that. I think, when some of the exhibitions I've been to the British Museum, kind of, going to the one about Romans recently, sort of changes your view of what that society was like. You kind of find yourself rethinking things. I think a really well-curated exhibition is like a work of literature or like a painting in itself. It's somebody taking certain raw materials and putting a thesis forward for you. And if they have a sufficiently interesting take on it, I think you do find yourself learning new things, yeah.
Do you have advice for good curation when it comes to truth-telling?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think a curator is like a conductor in music, or, like a director in the theatre. I think it's somebody who can take and arrange ideas and facts and shape them in a way that feels engaging and draws you in.
I'm Elliot. I'm a friend and collaborator of Peter Kennard's. I'm a cultural curator and an academic and an artist myself.
How much do you trust museums to tell the truth?
In all honesty, I've never really trusted them that much. Good truth-telling is when you walk into a space and you feel something, not just see something, and when you can connect with imagery or objects, even if they're unfamiliar to you. It's what we feel, not just what we read or what we see. Recently, I just went to visit the Hayward exhibition of Tavares Strachan, and that moves me in a way that I haven't seen many shows that connect with me in such a way. And it's the use of media and the honesty within the image making. There's often been almost like a guilt phase where museums have reacted to what's going on as opposed to being the agents of change that they can be. They have the opportunity to be able to tell honest stories, or for artists to be able to share their truths. And so for me, particularly in the last 4 years, in the advent of the murder of George Floyd, I've seen this groundswell where museums have all of a sudden become really woke or right on, where they're kind of championing black stories. But I don't think a lot of that's very honest or truthful in the way that they do it, because there's been so often a knee-jerk reaction and the support hasn't been there. And it's not just about the issue of race, but so many other issues don't get shown because for them, so often it's about what becomes really populist as opposed to what really speaks to everyday people.
Does it matter if museums don't tell the full truth?
100% it matters, because they rely on everyday people to be their customers, their visitors, their consumers. And so they have a responsibility to be able to be really objective and have a parity with the artwork that is shown. So for me, it's fundamental that they need to tell the truth. Otherwise, they just become an extension mouthpiece of politics, which equally doesn't tell the truth. Funding is definitely always a barrier, and that is something that affects many of the institutions that, whether they're public or privately funded. I just think there needs to be other ways that as communities and collectives people get together and find other ways of telling our stories
What responsibility do you believe museums have to address contemporary themes like war and conflict in museums?
See, I don't think those themes are contemporary. Those themes have been there since the beginning of time. And I think it's a real sad state that Peter's work only gets shown every decade by a different museum, because there's never been a time in the past 5 decades since he's been working that his work is not relevant at a particular time. And so I just wish that museums would be less subject to those that actually put the plaques on the wall and pay for certain things to take place, and actually find ways of being able to share real, honest stories like Peter's work, which has always been relevant. And we look at his images, which he made 30, 40 years ago, and they were no less relevant now than they were then. That tells you an awful lot about his work and the way that it engages with society at large. Peter's work shows that if people rally together, those imagery, his art can be seen on placards all around the world. And it's not because a gallery has endorsed it as to why it has become applicable. It's because it's actually touched the hearts of people who they themselves feel that there's things that they want to be able to respond to.
As a curator yourself, what advice would you give to the next generation of truth tellers?
Younger curators and younger artists coming through need to understand that it's the long game and not the short game. And so often the institutions will want you to present certain things, and it almost becomes a bit like turning tricks for them, because they think that certain things would be really popular, because it would be really good to have certain kind of things, whether it's about gender or whether it's about race. But for younger artists and curators to not fall into a trap of just trying to tick the boxes that the museums and galleries want you to put on, because they think that's what's capturing their idea of what the zeitgeist might be. But understand that actually you may not get your chance to shine for 10, it may even be 20 years, but if it's something you're really passionate about and something that you really believe in, understanding that time is not finite, and that the people who are commissioning do not also determine how the audiences will receive your work or how successful you might be.
How much do you trust museums to tell the truth?
How much do I trust museums to tell the truth? It doesn't occur to me.
Do you think museums always tell the truth?
Certainly not. Absolutely not. I mean, and museums, like everything else, just a story. It's a story.
How much do you trust museums to tell the truth?
Oh, honestly.
Yeah, honestly.
Honestly, not too sure, because most truths are hidden, and they don't want to express it to the world. For instance, say that most things are from them, but it's actually not from them. And it's very, very, very sad that people that meant to be recognized for the art or for the things that displayed are not recognized, or they just monopolize it instead of appreciating the art.
Who do you trust the most?
Who would I trust? The artist.
Oh, you trust artists more than a museum curator, for instance?
Because
tell me about that. What is it about the artist that makes you trust them?
Because they have either their own view, how they see it, because they have to experience. They have, first and foremost, they have experienced it.
What's the worst lie somebody could say about your work?
The worst lie? I mean, well, I've had quite a lot of criticism, like being the king of lost causes, that sort of thing. But no, I suppose if people see it as just naive propaganda, that's what is the worst thing. That they don't see the artistry in it. I think that's the worst thing. Okay, I'll read this. It's called Whitechapel Library, Aldgate East by Bernard Copps. How often I went in for warmth and a doze, the newspaper room, whilst my world outside froze. And I took out my sardine sandwich feast, Whitechapel Library, Aldgate East. And the tramps and the madmen, I read all their worlds, their dark visions of gold. the reference library where my thoughts were to rage. I ate book after book, page after page. I scoffed poetry for breakfast and novels for tea, and plays for my supper, no more poverty. Welcome, young poet, in here you are free to follow your star to where you should be. That door of the library was the door into me. And Lorca and Shelley said, come to the feast, Whitechapel Library, Aldgate East.
Thanks for visiting the Museum of Truth and Lies. Join me on the next gallery tour of this limited edition series from wherever you get your podcasts. You can find out about the making of this museum in the online Museen, an artist-illustrated magazine packed with playful tools and games, lovingly co-created with Sold Out Publishing. Tell us your thoughts and share your museum photos using the hashtag MuseumTruthLies.